On behalf of ETPrime, welcome to this panel discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about managing risk, and my panelists are Mallika Srinivasan, Chairman and Managing Director, TAFE, Gautam Sinha, CEO, Times Internet Limited, and A. Balasubramanian, MD and CEO, Aditya Birla Sun Life. Classically, CXOs spent their time managing a few major types of risks: market risk, technology risk, security risk, and business model risk, of course. Today, we are staring at a brand new type of risk, and this is called business continuity risk. Many businesses were caught unprepared for this kind of global economic lockdown and are rapidly scrambling to put together a contingency plan to survive this current phase. Today's discussion is an attempt to understand what kind of risks the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown has created for businesses and how to manage those risks. So let's start with the first question. Mallika Srinivasan, I'm going to come to you first. In the current pandemic scenario, what is a good, effective risk assessment framework for a CEO? How should you look at risk?
Let me maybe just respond to that by stepping back for a moment to say what is essential part of a CEO's role. The CEO plays a very important role in bringing the outside to the inside. And I think as he assesses, be it markets, technology, customers, geopolitical situations, it's a very intrinsic part of his responsibility to assess the risks and plan for some countermeasures that will mitigate the risk. So, and there are a number of different types of risks, and most of us, I think, have learned, if I can put broadly the risks into three categories in terms of operational risks, strategic risks, and major external shocks to the system. I think a fair amount of companies, a good number of companies, have learned to manage both the operational risks and the good ones, the strategic risks as well, through a very systematic risk assessment and planning format. But I think what we are facing today is a completely different situation. It's a bolt from the blue, a truly black swan, if you may call it that. And not only is the type of risk completely unknown, I think its contours are completely unfamiliar, and we don't know. We don't know which way it's going to go. So I think the response that we have to put in place when we are faced with a shock like this to the system is vastly different from what we would do in terms of risk management during our normal course of business.
Bala, let me come to you with the second question. You work in the financial services sector. In your organization, how do you plan for a risk like what Mallika said, a black swan event? How do you plan for a risk like this?
Interesting, when the whole event occurred, and the first and foremost was is to ensure the operation continues. We deal with money. We have to ensure that the people who deal with us are ensured they get their money if they want the money. At the same time, they are being answered if they have any query with respect to their own money, and so on and so forth. Therefore, ensuring the business continues by making employees work from home very smoothly. I think that became actually the highest priority. And we, in fact, actually started preparing ourselves. The moment China broke out happened in the month of November, we started preparing that how to make people work from home. So it's moving the entire office and making the whole operation with the handling about money in tons and crores on a daily basis in terms of gross volume has to go very smooth. We cannot afford to have a single error which can actually put the whole system into a risk. So that's something which came as a priority. And second is with respect to managing the money especially, we need to ensure that we don't meet with any accident, especially when already people are coping with how to manage an accident. Therefore, we don't have any accidents in the portfolio, which again comes in form of some kind of conservative. So you actually take some kind of a trade-off. And during this period, what kind of risk you want to take, what kind of risk you don't want to take. And then comes the trade-off in respect to the construction of portfolio. At the end of the day, any portfolio is being constructed has an impact on the investors' sentiment and the financial market in general. So that's something which, again, from the portfolio point of view. Third, from the point of view of employee safety, I think again is something which is widely, of course, talked about. I think this goes without saying no doubt. But again, employee safety is something. Just ensure that you create a backend in a form of today. This period of especially in COVID, and most people do struggle as to how to manage actually the stress they go through. Therefore, some of HR related policies which ensure that in a given call you are able to actually reach out to the people. On a given call, they are able to reach out to the people who can actually help them, and that again is related to the employees. So three ways. One is of course operation related risk, second is the portfolio, and third is the employees. And all the three together is something which I think came as a focus area. Last but not the least, how well you actually stay committed in terms of communicating what is being happening and how we are handling things. That itself became actually one of the part of the risk mitigation metrics in the form of communication. Communication goes from HR on regular basis. Communication goes from a CEO. So one of the things, of course, we discovered, I think the frequent communication actually is the most invited during this period. Rather than you do a communication which once in a month and once in a quarter or once in a year, it completely got changed that more frequent communication is more welcome on the part of giving a soothing, especially time where people deal with a lot of unknowns for which you don't have an answer. The only way we can do is actually have a soothing dialogues and discussion.
All right, so Black Swan event, soothing communication. Gautam Sinha, actually, you're quite a lucky man because your sector, the internet, saw absolutely no shutdown. In fact, it saw a dramatic increase in traffic, with many internet companies reporting like extraordinary number of users during the pandemic. What risks does a pandemic and a lockdown pose for an internet-based company?
Sure. So before I get into that answer, let me just say that there are variances within Times Internet because we operate in about 7 different industries. Mm-hmm. And the business actually is a reflection of the specific industry in which it is. And I'll try to elaborate on that. So yes, absolutely, we have been lucky to a large extent because we were prepared to be digital. You know, as Times Internet, everything for us was digital, even from a work perspective. So the company was always enabled to be able to adapt something of this nature in terms of the people being in the white collar jobs in the specific places that they work. If you actually get into the next level of details, what this changed for us is the products and the businesses started to see a lot of traction. You know, so if it's news or entertainment or classified, we saw at least 50 to 60% growth in consumption of the products that we serve. But the monetization, when it comes to advertisement, the advertisers were not advertising to the same level, mm-hmm. which was to the pre-pandemic era. Mm-hmm. So the revenue didn't scale, but the engagement to the products started to scale. Okay. So you had to balance both the aspects, which we tried to convince ourselves that there is a short-term effect, which will translate into a long-term revenue or a EBITDA goal game for us as we proceed from here. So the advantage of digital actually enabled us to move to the first generation of work from home. You know, so if you look at work from home, the very first generation of work from home is you provision the internet to your employees, and you provision the access and make sure that everybody is able to access the workflow and the tools that is available to them. But that's not where it needs to stop. If you actually get down to and believe that work from home is here to stay, you know, you will see that now you have to be worried about the mental and physical health of people who are working from home. Our homes are not workplaces. You know, our homes are not designed to be workplaces. So getting into that level of thought processes, how do you give the things that people are missing out of office into the work is the second level of initiative that a company has to take to enable that. And those are the things that a company has to think through and figure out. And there is a third dimension that has to come again as to what does it do to remotability of an employee, you know, in that perspective. So can you have employees, if people can work from home, can you have employees working from a different city at all or from a different country? So having that cultural attribute getting imbibed in your processes and your hiring process and your evaluation process also becomes a majority of the task that a company has to deal with. No, I'll stop here.
All right. Thanks, Gautam. Malika, back to you. There have been two big themes in this pandemic. One is, of course, social distancing to keep ourselves safe. And the second big theme has been work from home or what's called remote ways of living. Your company manufactures farm equipment and sells farm equipment. How can you work from home?
I think it's been an amazing journey for most of our employees. Yes, we do farm equipment, but we have also were declared an essential services industry. So here we were, right from day one of the lockdown, trying to get our dealerships open. It had its own set of problems about both from fear from the local level plus practical difficulties on the ground. And then we were trying to get it was the peak of the agricultural season. So we had to find very creative, innovative ways of serving our customers to ensure that their farm equipment was up and running in time for the season. So I think we did a lot of virtual service. We did virtual product complaint resolution. We had skeleton teams that were very courageous to go out to the farm and service the equipment. We did a variety. We even launched new products digitally because it was our season and we had to go forward and do this. So I think there was a tremendous level of innovation that we adopted at the front end in our go-to-market. The manner in which we contacted our customers changed completely. We went to telecalling. We went and tied up with an amazing company that was using rural folk to contact, and mostly women. And that made me very proud. Mostly women to contact the farmers. They could speak to them in their local language. And when you saw those pictures of their very humble homes from which they were doing this fantastic frontline work, I think it was moving. It was moving, and it opened our eyes to say that there's so many opportunities by which we learned to do things differently. We engaged with different stakeholders. We engaged with people on the ground, close to the farmers in a manner, and influencers and local officials in a manner that we've never done before. And I can tell you, I think people in the company, we enjoyed it. We enjoyed it. It was very different, but it motivated. We gained market share. And I think the team is extraordinarily enthused at the end of this quarter.
Malika, they say that inspiration comes from desperation, or adversity creates creativity. What practices from this lockdown will you carry on in your company, assuming the lockdown is lifted 3 months from now? What are some of these innovative practices that you'll continue anyway, lockdown or no lockdown?
So if I may take it slightly differently and then talk to you about the practices are going to remain. But I'd really like to talk a little bit about what stays in my mind about some of those qualities that we found extraordinarily important for leaders during this period. For the entire leadership team, we found about 5 or 6 qualities, if I reflect upon it, came out as extraordinarily important. And I'd like to share that, and then I'll tell you what practices that we came out of this. First, I think, was really having an open mind. A completely open mind, accepting the reality. We can cast V scenarios for recovery, or V or U minus kind of recovery scenarios, but somewhere we have to accept that when it goes back up, life is not going to be, or the business model is not going to be what it was before. And I think getting that open-mindedness, putting it out on the table, is one important leadership trait. The second one I'd like to talk about is that I did mention at the beginning of this conversation that it's a black swan event and we couldn't have been prepared for it. But these qualities were some of the qualities that helped us come up and face this situation. And I'll touch on the second one I think is very critical, is agility. Agility to quickly assess the situation, see what levers we can use. And once your mindset is right, then you can come up with ideas of how do we tackle this, make up some plans. And again, we can't keep these plans firm. The plans will change. The goal is set, but the plans are going to change. So keeping an approach that is nimble enough to change as you go along was the second thing that I think was a learning during this. The third thing was resourcefulness. Even simple things we couldn't do the way we would normally do it. So it was about encouraging, empowering people in order to stretch themselves and come up with creative ideas, breaking down silos, reallocating manpower. And I think it brought out the best in terms of resourcefulness of people. And fourth was innovation. We saw so many companies innovate. They changed product because a pandemic like this brings out sharp changes in customer buying, and I think we heard one of the speakers talk about that in terms of customer preferences, in terms of buying patterns, and we saw people come out with very innovative products. The FMCG industry, we saw a lot of innovation. The way our own go-to-market in farm machinery, we went very differently. So innovation and quick response was another, I think, factor that I'd like to stress. And again, it's almost like somewhere it was a warlike situation. And therefore, the decisiveness that is required during a warlike situation was required from our leadership. It was not about, you couldn't fall prey to groupthink. You had to look at the details. You had to do that, but also be decisive. And finally, as Palla said, communication. Communication with all our stakeholders. Communication with our supply partners, with our dealers, with our bankers, supply with our employees, painting a vision of where we were going. And then communicate, because emotions are running high. Emotions are running high at this point, and recognizing that emotions are running high, it was about painting a picture. So these were some of the qualities that we found extraordinarily useful that led to the changes in the practices. And there are a number of things. I think the cost base that we found came sharply down, sharply down in the first quarter. I think it came more sharply down than we even imagined. And travel cost was not the only reason, but I think the manner in which we went about doing innovative ways of service, attending to quality problems, solving supply chain disruptions while working from home, all of this brought down the costs significantly. It showed us, and I think to me this has been a very important learning that the organization must attempt to institutionalize, is that we can do so much more for so little. So with very limited resources, we went forward, and I think that's a very critical learning. I don't think we would allow our cost base to go back to where it was. So that's a very critical learning, work from home, and the potential it offers in terms of diversity of people, of talent, and in the context of women, I will say it has opened our eyes to the many more opportunities where we can use women. So the diversity of talent that we can employ would probably be another learning. And thirdly, imagine creativity is the limit in terms of what you can do with limited resources, and continuing to foster that culture of innovation within the company would be a third learning.
All right, excellent. So open-mindedness, agility, resourcefulness, innovation, decisiveness, and communication. Those are some of the leadership qualities that Mallika spoke about. Gautam Sinha, working from home obviously is a double-edged sword. On one hand, there's no more commuting. There's no more need to dress formally. All the other trappings of traveling to work are not there. But it's a double-edged sword. Our homes are not made for work. I've turned my living room into a makeshift television studio using improvised lights. And I'm sitting in front of my computer for 8 to 10 hours a day now, staring at a screen. This is going to obviously create a fair amount of stress in employees whose homes are not made. As a leader, what do you do about this kind of stress that's being created?
If you look at the situation today, it all came to the home almost instantly. So it's not just you working from home, it's the children, the entire family. And there are probably 4 or 5 Zoom calls happening at the same time, Now, if you see the first generation of work from home, people are sitting out of their couches, lounging around and still trying to take the call. They don't have the ergonomics of the workplace, So in the long run, and if you are actually sitting for 8-10 hours, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt you physically, and it's going to hurt you mentally, because now you are socially isolated to the team that you are working with. Now, as you move from the first generation of work from home to the second generation, these become very important for you to at least start accepting and then trying to solve for it, as to how do you solve for your long-term health, both physical and mental, for the employees and the teams that are working this distance. So you have to start right from the hiring process to onboarding and figuring what are the infrastructure elements that are required to be able to cope with it. As a leader, these are unprecedented times. and you don't know what you don't know, So it's good not just to communicate one way. It's very important to listen, because your teams are going to tell what is not working for them. So having a mechanism to understand that and listen to the actual problem so you can come back with an answer and accept that this is here to stay. How do I improvise the overall work culture and health of the organization through these processes? The other, both a positive or a double-edged sword, is as you started to learn that your work is remotable, and the advantages, especially that you can save a couple of hours of commute every day, which you can deploy productively either with your family or any personal entertainment task that you want to do or consume in the work. Now, because that 8 hours is not defined, a lot of people are actually tending to work a lot more, and they don't know where the boundaries are, from that perspective. And that is a way to mentally train yourself as where the boundaries are, both from the office itself, which is the management, and the employees, to understand and come to a healthy mix of it. The third dimension which I was trying to add is the remotability of work. So I'll take the example of Delhi. If pollution for a couple of months was a big problem, if you think that is a problem that you need to address, why can't the teams work from the places where they live? This could be tier 2, tier 3 towns. They should be able to work from there. What is essential is have a 3-month onboarding, but then you can distribute your teams anywhere. Now that gives you the flexibility to employ best of talent globally, not just limited to your local place, but it also allows your competition to employ your teams. So it's a double-edged sword from the same point of view. I'll stop here.
True. Bala, I'm going to take off from the last thing that Gautam said, that one of the things the pandemic has taught us that we can all be anywhere. Gautam is joining right now from California. Malika is joining from Chennai. Assume Bala and I are joining it from Mumbai. Right? We're doing this transnational. So you can hire people, you can manage people who you've never met in real life. For a financial services company, what kind of new risks does this pose? Gautam said you could maybe hire somebody who's working for your competitor and you would never know.
Yeah, of course. Clearly, this whole pandemic has taught a lot of lessons to people, how you can be more efficient and how you can make impossible as a possible with respect to managing various things that we are doing. I think as Gautam mentioned about, it's about actually the longer hours of working, which people don't mind giving that kind of longer hours of working, given the fact that work from home, that they're able to actually reduce the travel distance, etc. So I think the risk, of course, operating from home, of course, we tried in terms of polling more employees, how many of them would actually come back to work and then opt for work from home and opt for work from office. I had a 30% kind of ratio. 30% of the people said they'll work from home, 30% of people said work from office and home, 30% of people said they'll come to office. So that's being the case. The question is, and then how do you actually ensure that that people actually are able to give their fullest working from home in terms of delivery? I think that's something clearly keeping a metrics in terms of the deliverables, I think would be key in managing the output of the individual. They're able to contribute to the truest, at the same time manage what they are supposed to deliver from the business point of view. That's one. Second, from financial risk point of view, we deal with money. When we deal with money, of course, this is the time where most of the time that in the financial risk business, we always cite the reason as compliance, regulatory, and these are some of the things will come in the way of doing many things. In the last 2 months period or 3 months period, they have found many ways and means we can actually operate within the same framework of regulation, which otherwise would have actually stopped in not doing many things in the past. Now it actually is allowing you to do because of the pandemic, and at the same time ensure that you are well within the regulations. So sometimes we all take that kind of call. It's a black and white kind of calls we take, and we don't do certain things. So that's something once it becomes a nature of people do from work from home and apply all those things, then how to actually monitor them. I think the monitoring it on Not of course policing it, I will not call it as policing it, but as monitoring it on a regular basis and ensure that when we deal with the task that has been given is delivered to the truest within the broad regulatory framework, within the broad spectrum of operation that we set aside for the company, even from customer point of view. The third, of course, is risk, which nowadays I don't ask any of my team members, where are you? The one common question we used to always ask, where are you? Are you in Delhi and so on? Nowadays you don't ask because everybody is of course operating from home but still doing the same work from rest of the places. Therefore, one other thing which I see as an opportunity is the talent sourcing is becoming a lot more easier. Wherever, even from sitting in America, you can actually manage certain activities in India and vice versa. We always used to think offshore and onshoring of work, which happens in the technology space. Now it's equally applicable even in the financial space, that you can actually have the talents. So that essentially means some amount of risk in terms of how to actually manage your team dynamics in the change world, where people can actually deliver to the fullest of their potential, at the same time retain the importance of being in the organizations. These are some of the things which comes to my mind, Suresh. Of course, the risk is something in our industry is the insider trading. The way I think you are sitting at home and you are able to manage the customers' expectations, that remains actually a key risk for us, the financial business.
Okay. All right, Malika, I'm coming back to, sorry, Malika, you wanted to add to that.
I was listening to this discussion on the work from home. I thought I'd like to share an interesting feedback that we had a few days ago. We were talking to the women in the office, and we had a Zoom call, and we were talking to the women in the office, and I think we had some very interesting feedback. Most of them came out and said that they believed that the productivity was up. They believed that while they're used to multitasking, in the initial days, the pressure on them was very high, but now it's settled into a routine, they're able to manage. So they're quite enjoying that. But strangely, they said, while they love this, and the respect for them at home has gone up because people are beginning to appreciate how hard they work. So that was an interesting angle. And most importantly, they said, going forward, we don't want to do work from home full time. We'd like to have an option where we come sometimes to the office. One of them, for example, said to me on the call, it's nice to meet you and speak to you after so many months. So they want that social interaction. And so it's a question of how, therefore, are we going to balance, yes, essentially work from home, but also be able to come to the office, one, to bond with their colleagues, and secondly, to also, as they said, give us a little space. We need a little space. We need to get out of home. We need to get out of home. We need to get to the office. So I thought this was interesting feedback and quite mature feedback. So the challenge for us as corporates is how do we give this flexibility while keeping the bonds, the cultural bonds, the ties, as well as their attachment, some space for them when they come to the office. So I think this is what we are grappling with.
Malika, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question to that. The last few years, we've been hearing reports of a reduction of women in the workforce, at least in the white-collar workforce. There's been a reduction of women. So will this COVID and pandemic help in more diversity? Will more women enter the workforce now?
I really think so. I am somehow, I'm very firmly believing, and I explained to you the example that I saw of the rural women working from their homes. We have a group of differently abled women running a factory for us, and they showed some marvelous courage the way they handled the work during this lockdown. And I think the concept of working from home has become so well accepted that in itself gives a tremendous opportunity for women. And if we play both at the corporate level and at a government policy level, if we can play this correctly, I think here's a nice opportunity to step up sharply. The participation of women in the workforce lags behind a number of developing countries also, certainly the BRIC nations, in terms of women participation in the workforce. So this could be an opportunity to change that and provide the step change up, and I think it will happen.
Gautam, same question to you. Will this pandemic see a greater diversity in the workforce because of work from home and the other technologies that we're using?
I think so, and I hope so. I think for multiple reasons. See, a large part of the women population to work was hampered because of commute, you know, and the hours which were fixed, you know, which is the prime hours of the day. Now, if you, for a moment, start believing that gig economy is going to happen, where you can do 1 or 2 jobs that you like anywhere in the world, it will pull a lot of people, especially in the women population, into the workforce. You know, from that perspective, I certainly believe that the gig economy will get a certain boost out of this pandemic, because people have started to now realize that this is actually possible. A lot of the things that we are seeing in the macro ecosystem, you know, we used to believe that a sales can't happen till you actually meet the person. Mm-hmm. Now the pandemic has forced people to close the deal without actually meeting the person. Yeah. So it's not that people didn't think, but they never believed that it can actually happen. Now these are, or even a board meeting, you know, today, board meetings are happening virtually, where it was mandated that you have to all be in a physical place, you know, to conduct a board meeting. Now, all these beliefs that we had in our mind are changing, you know, with data points and proof points. So people are taking the positive walk towards, hey, this is possible, and this, I've seen it work. So they will further push the limits to these aspects. I do think a lot of opportunities where the rigidity of the workplace goes away will encourage a lot of diversity in the workforce, you know, across the country. And that's both my thought process as well as my hope as well.
Thanks, Gautam. My next question is actually to all three of you. I'm going to start with Bala first. It's a simple question. What are the top 3 elements of building a resilient organization? People are talking about agility and resilience a lot during this pandemic. Top 3 or 4 qualities that go into building this kind of organization.
I think 1 or 2 things which comes to my top of my mind, Suresh, is the learning curve of people has to be a constant. I think the world is changing, and as we're not prepared for a pandemic, something which now had to get adjusted. Therefore, the change is going to be real. Therefore, how far we keep the learning curve of every individuals to adapt to the new situation is something which is key to build a organization. Second is more from financial risk point of view, how we manage the risk on ongoing basis. This kind of risk suddenly will come. How well you are prepared for such unknown risk when it comes and hits you, and how you are actually prepared for such things is something which is again key. Third, of course, with respect to now that everything is becoming technology, and how well we are advanced with respect to adapting to the technology and using the technology for building a great organization. And also given the fact that the data is now becoming new oil, and no doubt is widely spoken about, the question is how truly are we able to use the data and analysis in building a business, adapting some kind of innovative approach, and that's something which again will remain as a key to the success in building a sustainable organization. And finally, the deep involvement of employees in the whole evaluation process, which I think is no more actually top-down, is also now becoming a bottom-up, where the collective involvement of employees can actually give a greater insight to the organization. Therefore, how well you actually are able to adopt it, and through the evaluation process of the co-create kind of model with the employees' contribution coming in. That's why I think all the 3 factors put together and involvement of employees, in my view, will create a very robust, resilient organization.
Malika, same question to you. Elements of creating a robust, resilient organization, whether you're a startup, whether you're a giant conglomerate.
Maybe let me begin with, I think the most important thing to building some resilience is, in my perspective, financial strength. Financial strength would be one, I think, a very balanced exposure, be it in terms of your revenue streams or be it in terms of your suppliers. That would be a second factor. And I think the key themes would work around prudence, modularity, variabilization of fixed costs. These are some of the themes that could build this financial strength and this balanced exposure while giving a very low cost structure. Having said that, I think resilience, what level of resilience you want to build in an organization is a question of the organization's risk appetite. I think we need to set standards for how resilient we want to make this organization, because there's a bit of a trade-off over there. And then every investment decision be measured against that standard, that benchmark that we will set before we take that call. But on a more reflective note, I think in India, by and large, we have become so used to growth over the last 1 decade that I think we've gone and taken a lot of risk. And I make this a very general statement that perhaps we have given growth the priority, and hence become a little bit more high risk and given a slight go by to building resilience. Maybe we need to revisit that perhaps.
Gautam, same question to you. The top 3 elements of building a resilient organization.
See, it has to start with the culture of the organization. So if the culture of the organization is open, collaborative, and you have defined the values that you believe in as an organization, these things are relatively easier to navigate. And a culture change doesn't happen overnight. It's patiently built over multiple years for any organization. And it's typically driven by the leadership of the company. So the leaders are very important to figuring out what the culture is. And when I say culture, it's not the things that is posted on the walls of any company. It's what people actually believe and what they think they have to operate, you know, from how they operate in terms of collaboration, how they operate in terms of meritocracy, how they operate in terms of diversity, you know, and the entire thing when it comes to the actual operation of the company. Now, on the culture, you start overlaying the mission and the vision of the company, you know, and the mission and the vision of the company is something which relates to your financial goals as well, you know. So understanding what the financial goals and the objectives of the company, and in situations like this, if you have gone through a regular exercise and developed a risk mitigation matrix, you know. So what I mean here is our organization typically does an exercise in which they plot the severity of an event and take the mitigating steps which they outline, and they review the process and prioritize it from a risk mitigation setup, you know, with a certain frequency. So if the organization has already built in these processes in terms of mitigating the risks, it's just opening the book and the SOP and trying to deal with it. Now, a pandemic like this, which is a swan event and is unpredictable in terms of its scale of what the changes can be. Some are very direct changes and some are indirect changes, you know. Now, someone has to be sitting and do some future gazing as to how it will impact the specific industry that is getting impacted because of this. So if I take 2 examples from my portfolio, one is in education tech, which is, you know, has just gone through the roof because everybody has now started to believe that education, at least the ways it's going to be delivered, has fundamentally going to change, you know, and there is no questions about it. Students, we thought that they can't learn online, are now forced to learn online. And that behavior is continued to going to change across the world. You know, Harvard is conducting all its courses online, and the student can do that course sitting right there in India, in any city, in any part of the world, you know. So if that is the change, how can a business in your portfolio take advantage of that and become more resilient, not just as a risk, but also as an opportunity to capitalize, because it has given you certain tailwinds. A different example, which is the restaurant industry, is one of the business that I run. Now, the pandemic certainly has impacted the restaurant industry at a massive level, you know, and this is anything which is touch and feel has to take a step back and reevaluate as to what is that they are going to do and how they are going to do. Now, this team is continuing to evaluate and trying to think ways to innovate around contactless dining, you know. So the ability of an entity to be able to figure out what is the opportunity that lies because of a change given to them is coming directly from the culture that the company has inherited, or the teams have inherited from the company's culture, right? That's.
All right, that brings us almost to the end of this discussion. I'm going to ask each of you for closing comments, and I'm going to go turn by turn. Bala, my first closing question is to you. The term black swan has been used quite often by panelists on this discussion and by business commentators around the world to describe this event. A black swan event is supposed to occur once in your lifetime. But the financial services industry has already seen it twice in the last 20 years, once in 2008 and once. Why are black swans becoming so regular?
Of course, it's interesting. We had Nassim Taleb part of one of our annual conference very recently. In fact, he said the man who wrote this book as Black Swan is that the current COVID event is not a Black Swan event. Okay. I was even surprised to hear that.
Okay.
But irrespective of that, definitely I think the world is getting integrated. I think we can't escape from that. The world is getting integrated. In a financial market, sometimes we make a joke that if Japan sneezes, India may get a cold. So I think the fungibility, I think, has gone up quite a lot. Mm-hmm. In this kind of scenario, when the financial markets are all getting integrated and we are now adapting to the global practices, when this kind of event comes, such COVID, where the entire the economy is actually taken backward by about 1 or 2 years, then naturally, actually, it affects the whole economy in general and also the financial market in particular. And the financial market, if it doesn't remain calm, and naturally, it actually impacts the whole the system as a whole. So, being part of the financial market, in fact, one of the things that we were quite busy during the period of COVID, during that entire unknown period, is to actually liaise with the respective policymakers and make them understand and give them a kind of input as to how things can be managed. As we have seen in the case of 2008, it was more restricted on the financial market related to the US, whereas this time is around the entire world is getting impacted. Therefore, how actually one manages that. So this is something which I think the black swan event, what you're saying is many unknown thing which comes and hits you because the world is getting integrated. Therefore, need to be prepared for that is more important. This is why I think I remember our own chairman statement which comes, which is an employee message he always gives, which should be the last man standing and first man forward, which essentially means what is most important during this period is stay afloat and ensure that we manage the risk in a more prudent manner. So all of us have a fiduciary responsibility. And then as things take off, at least that time we are ready actually to capture those opportunities.
All right. Thank you, Bala. Malika Srinivasan, I'm going to ask you a personal question. Tell me one way in which you have personally changed during this pandemic and lockdown in your leadership style. What personal changes have you seen?
In my leadership style, I think I would have never imagined, honestly, that I would have been able to do my job and do it not just effectively and productively, but I've been able to bring about a strategic shift, a reset in terms of our direction, taking into account all the external environment, the changes that are happening around us, take stock of that. I working from home, I would never have believed it was possible to do that. But it has opened my eyes to say, yes, we not only are able to deal with the situation, we are able to put in place our entire change in our strategic approach, outline that clearly, as well as draw up our plan, for example, in areas like digitization, and take those big steps required for the future. I wouldn't have thought it was possible. Certainly, I'm working many more hours, as some of our other panelists said, than I worked before, maybe, and I must say, I'm exercising extraordinarily regularly. Compared to before. So all around, it's been great, missing the social life, of course. So perhaps realizing how much of it went into the social life at one point. But I think it's been a big lifestyle change, and it's working. And it's working. And I'm thinking to myself this morning that maybe as we go forward, we won't travel so much for work anymore. The travel will be primarily for leisure.
True. A lot of us are learning that we're eating more healthy and we are exercising more often. So the pandemic is a net positive for many of us who work from home. I'm going to let Gautam Sinha have the final word in this discussion. Gautam,
before Gautam goes in, say a word about, since we're talking about women leadership and everything, I am also hoping that this will have a positive wind of change as far as opportunities for women are concerned. And I know Gautam is equally optimistic about that. And I hope that that opportunity will bring about a wave of change in Indian homes as well.
I hope so too. We need more women leaders both in the workplace and in the home.
The whole ambience at home and everything. I'm looking forward with women taking more and more participation in the economy, that there will be some nice winds of change sweeping across Indian homes as well.
That is the hope. We all hope for exactly the same thing. Gautam, I'm going to let you have the final word in this conversation a year from now. 1 year from now, I'm going to convene the same panel, you, Mallika and Bala. What do you think we'll be talking about? That we're all vaccinated and it was a scare, it went off, or it's still there? Or
I think it's not, we can't be as optimistic that 2021 will change everything. We'll certainly make progress. But we also have to start to learn to live with pandemics like this. You know, and I think it's important for both the workplace and the homes to adopt to how we act both socially and professionally in the workplaces in changed environments like this. A lot will change, you know, and I don't want to mince my words by saying and understanding that, but I don't think the world is going to go back to pre-COVID era in a year from now, you know. And I think that change, that because of this pandemic, we have to understand what are the things which will accelerate. You know, specific to my industry, as we started out by saying, digital adoption probably will get a 10-20% boost, and the compressed timelines of at least 2 to 3 years in terms of digital adoption has already happened or started to happen, and people are seeing that kind of behavior. Now the social changes related to that and technological changes, especially the adoption and the acceleration in adoption of ML and artificial intelligence, will also try to compensate for the things we're not able to get face-to-face time. You know, so you will also see these technological changes happening within the ecosystem, within the macroeconomy, to be able to bridge the gaps that we have lost because of the COVID and the pandemic. You know, even some of the compensation in terms of social behavior, you will see a lot of technology coming into play in terms of how that behavior gets compensated. We are not going to leave our social health and our mental health behind. So we have to find mechanisms to cope with it or even excel in it in the current situations. I do hope that in a year, you know, this is behind us, but I don't think I will be that optimistic from just a business point of view that things are going to go back to normal, you know, this soon.
All right. Thank you, Gautam. That brings us to this the end of this discussion on managing risk. Mallika Srinivasan, Gautam Sinha, and A. Balasubramanian, thank you very much for joining us on behalf of ETPrime.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Yes.